Hello, everybody. I think everything's connected okay. Hopefully you can see and hear me. And you may be able even to hear little catty purring. Someone asked this last week if we still had a cat. And I said, of course, I'll let you see her next time to prove it. So you can see that little catty's still alive and well, 22 years old. I know some of you really love to see our little sumudu. So that's a nice treat for you. I'll just put her a little close to the mic. Don't know if you can hear her purring. So, great. Good to see that you can all hear and see me and see Caddy too. Seeing people connecting in from all parts of the globe, from Czech Republic as well, and Northumberland. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to put Caddy down now and she'll go straight back to bed. Say bye. Bye to the people. Bye, everybody. She doesn't do much, but she probably sleeps about 23 hours a day. 22, 23, or maybe it's not all sleeping. I'm sure some of it's just sitting up, purring. Jhana. Cat Jhana. Okay. So I'll just adjust some things. I have a new screen here, so get you to see Tara there. Great. Yes, cats, when you observe them, they can get into quite a samadhi state if they're happy, if they're purring. I think purring is the meditation technique for cats to dip into cat samadhi. They get very relaxed, very chilled. Okay, so welcome to part 3 or session 3 of our Buddha-Dhamma series. I just noticed a little mark on the screen. I'm just going to get that off. There we go. Oh. Yeah, so part 3 of this Buddha-Dhamma series. So it seems a long time between series, these sessions, these 6 weeks. But in a way, it gives you an opportunity to digest some of what I'm saying, maybe do your own research in between. And of course, we have the other meditations and Q&A in between as well. So what I'm going to do, instead of doing the meditation at the beginning, I'm going to talk about, the aspects of the teaching that I was going to talk about today, specifically looking at what we call the 5 aggregates, or the 5 Khandhas, or the upadana-khandha, and the 3 characteristics of conditioned existence, because these are so central to our contemplative practice, to ultimately understand the 4 Noble Truths. So then once I talk about these 50 minutes or so, Then we can go into a meditation, a guided meditation, where I can help guide you to recognize these things within ourselves, the 5 khandhas or the 5 aggregates. They're nowhere else. It's this very body, mind, and everything that we experience. And the 3 characteristics are characteristics of that experience that the Buddha encourages us to recognize, because they are doorways to insight, to understanding. So while I'm giving this talk, probably best not to use the chat, so as you can just really focus on the talk. If questions come to mind, you might want to write them down, but don't pop them into the chat at this point. It'll tend to distract me from my line of thinking, but it'll also distract others. So often the questions that arise within a Dharma talk for the listener, it can often get answered a little further down. So just stay in your meditative, contemplative mind, open mind, listening mind, and just let this stream of teachings or contemplations go in and just guide your own contemplation. That's kind of what this is about. And then when I finish the talk, we can open up for Q&A, or we'll do the meditation first and then open up for Q&A. So great, we'll get started then. So I'm hoping that all of you tuning in will have had the opportunity to listen to the first and second of these sessions, because really I'm going through it fairly methodically. My talks, they're extemporaneous, but introducing the 4 Noble Truths in the first session as the nutshell, and talking about how we can see and understand this particular paradigm that the Buddha presented his teachings in, and how profound and skillful it is, because everything about the Buddha-Dhamma, and in fact everything about our experience in this world, about the conditioned reality and the unconditioned reality, can be found within this framework of the 4 Noble Truths. I mean, some might question the unconditioned reality found within that, since it's a paradigm, but actually the 3rd truth of the cessation of suffering is pointing to that reality, is pointing to the possibility, the realization of that. And so presenting that in the first session, and then in the second session we looked a little bit more specifically at the 4th truth, being the path. It's talked about as the 8-fold path, or the 8-limbed path, the 8-aspected path, which is really the way of training body, mind, or the way of abiding, the way of being, the skillful, the cultivation of skillfulness that allows or supports a realization, or moves in the direction of realizing the end of suffering, experiencing the end of suffering, letting go of suffering. You know, there's so many things one could say about these things, but we're limited in time and scope, so I try to just pull together the salient aspects of these things which speak to me and that I can share with you. So today, why I suggest going into looking at the 5 aggregates, the 5 khandhas, or in Pali they call them skandhas, and the 3 characteristics of existence, because these are central to our contemplative practice, our meditative practice. what it is the Buddha's encouraging us to have a look at, have a fresh look at, and investigate in order to, let's say, sweep away the delusion or the assumptions, the conditioned assumptions we carry with us, and we learn the way we learn to see and relate to the world of things. The world in the Buddha's dispensation is basically everything we experience internally and externally. It's not the world out there beyond the frame of this body. It's internal and external. So to have a fresh look at those things in a way that we might be able to see what he's pointing to, we might be able to understand exactly what he understood, which led to the liberating insight. It led to the realization of the deathless, the unconditioned reality, nibbana, which put an end to all kinds of suffering, destroyed greed, hatred, and delusion altogether. And so we call this liberation or freedom or reality, a full understanding such that there's no more delusion that creates the unnecessary suffering we, in our delusion, we put ourselves through or we find ourselves in. So these 5 aggregates and the 3 characteristics of existence, they are found within the Four Noble Truths. They relate to very much to the first truth about this truth of dukkha. And to just mention again that dukkha, the usual translation is into English is suffering or unsatisfactoriness or stress. And it often gets misunderstood, people who don't really understand Buddhism, but they start to look at what are the tenets of Buddhism. And they say, the Buddha says that life is suffering. This is not at all what he said. Or that everything is suffering. This is not at all what he said. He did point out that all conditioned experience, has the mark of dukkha, or the sign of dukkha, or the characteristic of dukkha, as well as anicca, which is impermanence or transience, and anatta, the not self-reality or the insubstantialness, instability, insubstantialness, the empty nature ultimately. So I'm going to explain these things. They're linked, the 3 characteristics and the 5 khandhas, because the 5 khandhas is where dukkha appears, where dukkha is experienced. Now, as I said, dukkha is, we can call it unsatisfactoriness, but it has 3 aspects in that there is just simple pain, painful physical sensation, painful mental sensations. And this is called simply dukkha, dukkhata. It's obviously painful, unsatisfactory in its painfulness. It's not something any of us want. It's not pleasant. It is what it is. But the Buddha definitely said there is pleasure in life. There's no doubt. If there weren't pleasure in life, people wouldn't become attached, right? If there weren't pain in life, people wouldn't become repelled. Repelled by the painful, the unwanted. But he said it within that teaching too. If there weren't an escape from dukkha, people would not be able to realize that. So it's pointing to the fact that there is an escape, what gets termed escape, or the possibility of release from being trapped in this experience. So the dukkha, there's the painful aspect of dukkha, but this pleasantness that we can experience is also classed as dukkha, not because it's unpleasant or painful, but because it changes. Even when we get the feelings of pleasure with various kinds of sense experience, it doesn't remain, it doesn't stay like that, it changes. So this is why this aspect of experience is also called unsatisfactory, because when pleasure wanes, what emerges is something usually a little less pleasant, a little more painful or unpleasant. You know, the feeling tone of experience really has just is this one spectrum between pleasure or pleasantness and unpleasantness, or pleasure and pain, and neutral, kind of at the middle point. We'll talk more about that. The third aspect of dukkha is called sankhara dukkha. Sankhara meaning pointing to the fact of things being compounded and conditioned. So this sankhara dukkha is felt like as just one could say almost the weariness of being subject to conditioned reality, an ongoing stream of sense impressions and experiences that feel that it feels to us there is no relief from. So this sankhara dukkha is a finer aspect of just the sense of being bound by conditioned reality, bound by kind of a karmic reality. Yeah. So these are the three aspects of dukkha. So we're not just looking at painfulness. That's one aspect of dukkha. So these three characteristics are in regards to what we call these five khandhas. Now, those of you who haven't heard much about the Buddha's teaching, this might sound quite foreign. Khandhas is translated as aggregates or groups of things. And it seems that this paradigm of the five khandhas or skandhas was already prevalent within the spiritual contemplative world that the Buddha existed in. Because when he first came to teach his five friends after his full awakening, and after his first explaining that he'd understood, what he'd understood was in fact these four truths, he went on to explain them in more detail. And this first truth, this truth of dukkha, we have to recognize when dukkha arises in our experience. And I'll go more into this later in terms of how to recognize. The second aspect is that we need to understand it. We need to understand this dukkha, how it arises, how it ceases. Because without understanding it, comprehending it with insight, we tend to get, we're deluded by it and we get entrapped by it. We look for ways to get away from pain, unpleasantness, unsatisfactoriness. In fact, we can plan our whole life trying to get away from this, but we never quite do because we don't have the right understanding yet about what it is, how it arises, how it can be allayed, how it can cease. So we need to recognize dukkha when it arises, the squeeze on the heart. We have to understand what's going on, what it is, what's arisen. And realization, full realization only happens when you have comprehended you have fully understood dukkha. With the full understanding of dukkha, the other four truths are also understood. So the full understanding of dukkha actually implies you understand not only how it arises, how it comes to be, but also how it ceases. And therefore, when you understand how it ceases, how it is allayed, then you've realized, once you've understood that fully, you've reached the end of its ability to entrap us, to ensnare the being. So when the Buddha talked about dukkha, he just pointed to simple things, like first, something that we can all relate to, that birth is dukkha, the experience of birth. If you really, I know there's lots of profundity in the experience of birth, but if you look in the actuality, not only is the mother under extreme stress in the act of giving birth, the child is put through quite some stress in the act of birth. Just looking at that simply, it's a painful process. But once born into the world as vulnerable beings, we're exposed to this ambiguity, what's called the ambiguity of existence. Anything can happen, right? There's pleasure and there's pain. You never know what's going to happen. The being, the newborn, is just subject to this contact, whether it's pleasant or painful. But the ambiguity of that it's not always pleasant, it's often painful. It sets up certain processes in the psychology, the biology of the being in order to adapt to that environment. We won't go into that here, but just to say, the Buddha says that birth, aging, not only as we grow up, we know the unsatisfactoriness or the stress involved in growing up into our teen years, early 20s, navigating the world, but also aging once you're past the prime of life. The dukkha of aging. This body is never the same. It's and particularly on the more mature years, the body becomes more and more painful, more and more limited in various ways. So birth, aging, illness, disease is dukkha. When the body, having been born, we're inevitably vulnerable to disease, to accident. All sorts of things can go wrong with this system. That's just the nature of having been born, the nature of the body, the nature of this realm. So just recognizing that that's also an aspect of unsatisfactoriness. Aging and death is an aspect of an experience we can call dukkha. And I mean, this is just what the Buddha's pointing to as for ordinary people, for all of us, birth, aging, illness, death is dukkha. Death, I haven't died yet, but watching how this body ages, death may be quick without pain, but often death comes slowly with pain. And it's also painful for loved ones who lose others to death. So in many ways, we can point to the dukkha of death. But then he said, on the emotional level, sorrow, lamentation, grief, pain, despair, these things that we encounter in life on the emotional level, we can also sum up into an experience of dukkha for the human being. It's not what we want. It's stressful and painful. But then he made this summary comment, or this summary statement. He said, in brief, the 5 aggregates affected by clinging are dukkha. So I'm just going to ask if people would refrain from putting stuff into the chat, as I asked earlier, because it really is distracting for others. Trying to listen into the talk, and a little bit distracting for me too. So if you wouldn't mind just waiting till the Q&A for that, I'd really appreciate it. So in brief, the 5 aggregates, the 5 khandhas affected by clinging are dukkha. So this summary statement is presenting this paradigm, the panch upadana-khandha, the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, that this is where they're dukkha, this is where dukkha can be seen, felt, can be contemplated. Now it's a pretty kind of global statement, because the 5 aggregates are the body-mind, basically. Form being the physical form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and sense consciousness are these 5 aggregates or groups of things that carry the mark of dukkha. Yeah, in these various ways that I talked about earlier. The stressfulness of pain, or the change of pleasure to pain, or just the sense of being affected by and somewhat entrapped in this conditioned experience. This is the ordinary person's experience of the world. So before you go to that place, it says, oh, I'm not any of this. I am unborn, someone says. Who is unborn? First, we got to look at the arising of dukkha. If you don't experience any dukkha at all, fair enough, you may be fully awakened. No need to listen to what I'm saying. You're done and dusted. Yeah? But if there's still this experience of dukkha, then the mind yet hasn't fully understood something. If there's this feeling of being still entrapped by this experience of dukkha, where the I-ness, the me-ness, the my-ness appears at its finest level still, that's still an aspect of dukkha. So we want to, while the Buddha's explaining this, he's explaining, where this teaching comes from. That first teaching he gave to his friends about the 4 Noble Truths. The second, and in that first teaching, one of those disciples attained stream entry through the insight of all that arises ceases. So this insight is seeing that the all, which are the khandhas, these 5 aggregates, all that arises ceases. So he's seeing the mark of anicca, the impermanence of everything, all the conditioned experience, all the phenomena that is arising, seeing that clearly for Ayya Jitindriya was his awakening to stream entry, the first stage, not yet full awakening, but an insight, an understanding of the path, and a glimpse of the deathless. So sometime later, the Buddha continued to teach these 5 disciples, and he taught about how to contemplate these aggregates of existence, our very experience in terms of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, sense consciousness, to recognize these things in ourselves, this, which is this display of experience in its multifaceted form of body, mind, and to contemplate them, to ask the questions, are they permanent? So he literally did just that. Saying, bhikkhus, do you see this form? Form being the basis of form is the 4 elements, so that feeling, that sense of physicality, this form that you experience, whether it's internal in terms of this body or external in terms of a material object you see, to contemplate, is that experience permanent or impermanent? So we can look at it on 2 levels. This body is changing constantly. It never stays the same. It moves from birth to youth to old age to death and disappears. It's certainly impermanent. Similarly with any material object, it's always undergoing a process of change, of decay, of aging, until at some point it all breaks apart. So that's like one level of recognizing the impermanence of form. But in your contemplative process, and I'll guide you in the meditation with this to observe, as form appears in the mind as a contact of solidity or weight, resistance, that is the direct experience of form in the moment. And it similarly very quickly arises and ceases. These contacts are only very momentary. So how can you say that form is permanent? Nevertheless, the Buddha asked, is form permanent as you observe it? Can you say it's permanent? And the monks answered, no, Lord, it's not permanent. Well, if this form is not permanent, can you say of that it is satisfactory, that it is something that you can glean your happiness from, your satisfaction from, pleasure from always? No. How can something be that is changing in a continual process of change ultimately be an object of satisfaction? Even a pleasant feeling, a pleasant object, because it doesn't stay that way. So it can't be a basis of ultimate satisfaction. And he said, well, if something is impermanent and dukkha because it can't provide this stable satisfaction, then is it appropriate to say of that? Would it be right to say of these changing things which are showing the sign of dukkha, that this is me, this is mine, that this is what I am? And as the monks inquired into that within their own experience, they said, no, that's foolish to say of these changing things which have the sign of unsatisfactoriness, that they are me, they are mine. It is what I am. Because as soon as you look into these changing things, they show their insubstantiality, their changeability. How can we claim them? Something that is now here, now gone, to be me, to be mine, to be some kind of stable me-ness, mine-ness, I-ness. So this was the direction of the Buddha's inquiry and encouragement to his disciples to inquire, not only with form, but now to look at feeling. That affective tone of pleasant or unpleasant with regards to any sense contact, any moment of consciousness. Can you say that that feeling is impermanent? That feeling is permanent? No, it's so fleeting. Can you say that it is a cause or a basis for satisfaction? No, because it's so fleeting. If it's pleasant, it's fleeting. If it's unpleasant, it's painful. It's not satisfying. Well, if it's changing, if it's impermanent, transient, unsatisfactory, can you say of that feeling, that Vedana, that affective tone of sense consciousness of all our experience, can we say that it is me, mine, what I am? And they responded, no. Similarly with perception. Perception, sanya is a Pali term. It's related to memory, the kind of learned labels, the learned images, the recognized images, labels, memory in the mind. It learns to discern things, name things. And it's based on memory, on learning, on conditioning. This is what perception is. So we might see chair, wall, house, cat, blue, red. The brain, the being, the mind learns to recognize things. And whilst delusion is still present, kind of reifies thingness from these labels, these categories we've learned to name things by. So that's the khandha of perception. Similarly, very transient, conditioned, not satisfying, not self, not who and what we are. It's part of a conditioned process. Form, feeling, perception, mental formations, sankhara. The learned ways of thinking, the learned ways of viewing, the notions, the ideas, the memes, the kind of give meaning, the way of thinking. These are similarly conditioned, impermanent, unsatisfactory, not a me, not a mine, not who and what I am. And sense consciousness, vijnana. When the Buddha encouraged his disciples to contemplate vijnana, he always talked of the vijnana, the sense consciousness that arises at the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. Mind being mano, the thinking mind, conceiving mind. And that these moments of sense consciousness, like a cognition, are just that. They're very momentary, but move very fast in a stream, just like these other aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formation, sense consciousness. This is one way of learning to discern the different aspects of bodily and mental existence. One way of discerning. The why this was a skillful means to look at this body-mind in terms of the aggregates, because they can each be discerned. Discerned in terms of seeing those experiences with awareness, with mindfulness, understanding their arising and ceasing nature. It doesn't mean, as a human being, they are the functioning aspects of our existence. We're not trying to destroy them. This is the way the body-mind works. The body-mind as a conditioned phenomenal appearance. But what we need to see, the important thing, is the clinging to them as me, as mine, as myself. So the khandhas in and of themselves are a functioning whole. Yeah? The clinging is where the suffering arises. So it's possible for the clinging, the attachment, the identification with these phenomena to be allayed, to disappear, to be removed through insight, which gives rise to the experience of these khandhas devoid of clinging. That one actually can live and fully understand with insight that this body is impermanent, not self. That satisfaction is not to be found in clinging to this. Similarly with the others, feeling, perception, mental formation, sense consciousness, we can be mindful of all of these processes of physical, mental existence without clinging. If there's proper understanding, if there's right understanding, the clinging is the poison, let's say. The clinging is where delusion is. The clinging is that which keeps us bound in samsara. The clinging being the belief, the unquestioned assumption that these particular things, these 5 aspects of bodily and mental existence, are me, are mine, are what I am. When the Buddha was asked in one teaching, how would you summarize the Dharma you teach in the most succinct way possible? And in brief, he more or less said that nothing whatsoever is worth clinging to. So it wasn't just don't cling or you shouldn't cling. But he just said nothing is worth clinging to. Because the clinging in itself is the cause of dukkha, the unnecessary suffering and experience of unsatisfactoriness that can be removed in this life, that can be allayed, can be let go of. There still remains the bodily formation, the karmic trajectory for as long as this life lasts. But for someone whose clinging has been allayed or abandoned, then that remaining let's say, the khandhas without clinging, there may be residual dukkha because of the painfulness if they get sick or die or just having a body. But with full understanding, with clear understanding about what that is, there's no suffering. There's no mental suffering involved there. And in fact, full release, full understanding. So this, in brief, is the territory of the 5 khandhas and the 3 characteristics of existence. The Buddha taught this in the what was called the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the teaching on the not-self nature, which is said to be the second teaching that he gave to his 5 friends, upon which all of them, having contemplated and understood, all of them became fully awakened, which meant they really did understand what he was pointing to, and their suffering, their clinging was allayed, their clinging was abandoned, which means the delusion was cleared up. Once the delusion was cleared up, the clinging stopped. Because why would you cling to something that is painful when you see that if you cling to it, it gives pain? It's like the analogy of the hot coal. We can be grasping a hot coal for a long time, and we know the pain of it. We know it's hurting, but we haven't yet understood that it's because the hand is grasping a hot coal. But as soon as your attention is directed to where the source of the dukkha, and understanding it's the grasping of the hot coal, as soon as that connection happens, you let go. It's not as if you have to tell your hand, let go, let go, let go. Sometimes it feels like that. But when the connection really happens with wisdom and clear understanding, it's why would you, once you've understood that source, why the painfulness is there. Perhaps similarly, from a child who understands when they first put their finger in a flame, oh, that's hot. That's the learning. They don't tend to go there again. They've seen the cause of that pain. So this is how it's all related. It's all part and parcel of the Four Noble Truths in terms of understanding dukkha, understanding the nature of dukkha. When that is understood, fully comprehended, it and its causes, craving and clinging, with ignorance of that at its root, is abandoned. So I'm going to take this little teaching into a meditation right now to help you really start to discern what these things are within ourselves. The khandhas, the experience of the khandhas, the aggregates, and also the 3 characteristics. So just to say that these 3 characteristics are of conditioned existence. Conditioned meaning anything that comes to be, anything that has a beginning, it has an end. Anything that comes to be, it comes to be due to causes and conditions, and because those very causes and conditions are also a flux and a flow and transient changing phenomena, then the product that they produce also falls apart when they fall apart. So this word conditioned and conditioning factors, they relate this conditioned existence is all about what arises and ceases, what we can see and discern with wisdom that arises and ceases. And this is where the meditative experience is very important to our practice of understanding and gaining insight. So settle yourself into a comfortable position for some guided meditation. We'll probably do this for somewhere between 20, 30 minutes. If you need to stretch a little bit or have a sip of water, you can do so at this point. So before you close your eyes, just lower your gaze into, or just ahead of you a little bit. And just bringing your attention, your awareness to notice the body sitting wherever you are, in a chair or on a cushion on the floor. Just notice that shift of attention from thinking or paying attention to a screen to now directing your attention and being aware of the body in and of itself. This thing we call the body, right? The body is a label, an image, a perception. But it's, we wouldn't be able to communicate without perceptions, agreed on perceptions. So when I say the body, we all know what it means. So we direct attention to our bodily experience. So establishing a certain framework for our awareness, which is this experience of body. And lots of different experiences within the body. You might feel various sensations, or you will feel various sensations. For everyone, it's different. What are the sensations that you first become aware of? The sensations of the pressure where you feel the body sitting, pressing against the cushion or the chair. The sense of weight. So that's felt as a kind of resistance. The weight of the body, the force of gravity pushing this mass downward, meeting the resistance of the cushion or the chair. This is the earth, what we call the earth element, part of the form experience, or rupa, form. So just staying with those sensations for now, with the pressure of the body where it meets the cushion or the chair. How do you experience that? And if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes now to get more of a sense of focus around these sensations of pressure. How do you experience that sense of pressure? Just through this sensation of resistance. We can give it different names. pressure, resistance, heaviness, weight. This is the main aspect of rupa, of form. But when you really take a look at that, is it a sensation that stays the same? Is it one sensation that is a permanent experience? Or as you maintain your awareness, do you notice that that's a stream of different sensations? Even looking at this one place of pressure where the body meets the cushion. Kind of feeling of changing sensations. Perhaps like pins and needles. It's like it's moving. And we become aware of different aspects of those sensations. Even within that, we can feel, say, the heat, the warmth, where these two bodies, forms meet, the body and the cushion or the chair. And even our mind, our attention in perceiving that, it is felt as a kind of a flux. Attention itself has this kind of flow, momentariness to it, touching in, flickering. The cognition and the recognition of that sensation. It has this kind of flux. So with changing sensations, inevitably the flux or the stream of cognition of those sensations is also changing. We're noticing different aspects of this so-called one experience. At the same time, you're able to hear my voice. Or perhaps other sounds in the environment. Those sounds are similarly appearing for a moment and disappearing. Attention flickers between sound, sensation, thought, because we're also mind, in order to comprehend what I'm saying, is going through this subtle process of labeling. And I hear the sound, I can recognize it's the sound of the bird. So that label bird is something that happens in the mind. Or any other sound in the field, when you recognize what that sound is, what that particular vibration conveys or means, that's the labeling, that's the aggregate of perception. When we then think about it, that's a bird, that's a magpie. And I get the image of the magpie in my mind. I also get other associated images, memories of the magpie drinking at the bird bath, identifiers of this concept magpie. And that perception has a feeling tone. The image of the magpie drinking at the bird bath has a pleasant feeling tone for me. But it arises and ceases very fleetingly. This is what we want to notice. The play of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, sense consciousness. It's all in interaction with each other, these 5 aggregates. It's a complex of mental, physical phenomena playing out from moment to moment. Can you see that these experiences, can you see how fleeting they are in the moment? Having arisen, they pass away. In their changing, fleeting expression, we can't really say they're a me, that I, me, or mine. Just here for a moment, now gone. Where are they? Past ones gone, new impressions arising, but gone as soon as they've appeared and disappeared. Sense consciousness or cognition of sound, of bodily sensation, of cognition of thought, awareness of mental movement, awareness of thought, of concepts. Thoughts and concepts are similarly very fleeting, very momentary, conditioned, learned, discursive thought is in our learned language. Can we say that these thoughts that appear and disappear, are they permanent? How long does one thought stay? Can a thought or a concept ultimately bring complete satisfaction? Are they satisfying? If they appear and disappear, certainly the painful ones are not satisfying, but even the pleasant thoughts, they don't stay. They can't provide lasting pleasure or happiness or satisfaction. So is it wise to consider that thoughts that are so fleeting and changeable are me, mine, what I am? Where do thoughts come from? They seem to just appear as any of the other sensory impressions, like sound or sight. But they have a conditioned nature. They arise due to previous causes and conditions. Having learned a language, learned to think in particular ways, depending on the push-pull, what we like, what we don't like, what we want, what we don't want. But all of it is anicca, changing, transient, conditioned, unstable, unable to provide any kind of lasting happiness. It's all a flux and flow of conditioned phenomena. Some pleasant, some painful. It's just what it is. But there's no permanent me or my or I within that stuff. We may feel there is. Part of the delusion is, I am the thinker. I think the thoughts I want to think. The delusion conflates a sense of I, me, mine, with thought and thinking, with sensations of body, my body, what I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, without truly comprehending the insubstantial and fleeting nature of these khandhas. The assumption is of ownership, of me-ness, mine-ness, I-ness, mine-ness. But right there is exactly where dukkha arises. That conflation, that unquestioned, unexamined identification, attachment, clinging. Right there in that place is where unawareness, delusion is. But if we really examine that experience, it's not a question of belief, but a question of looking into, questioning, inquiring, bringing clarity of awareness to the actual experience, to observe what's really here. Don't try and talk yourself out of clinging or attachment, but just look, observe with mindfulness and awareness. And particularly notice the changing nature of sense experience. How long does it last? Just notice that. Don't try to change anything or force any notion of how you think you should be seeing it. Just notice the characteristic that's there to be seen of changeability, transience, temporariness. Notice with this quality of awareness, present moment awareness. We don't have to go anywhere else to experience sense impression. It's happening moment by moment, right here, right now. It's the reality that's playing out for everyone, right here, right now. Sounds, sensations, thoughts. When we're not engaged in sitting meditation, we'll have more of the sights, smells, tastes as well. But right now we're sitting meditation. We mostly recognize thoughts, sounds, sensations. There may be some scents in the air that we notice, or the taste of, neutral taste of saliva in the mouth. Just notice the brief momentary arisings of different impressions, sense impressions. Letting them come and go as they do. You can start to notice as the mind becomes more settled in awareness and clarity. We can start to notice the subtle images arising with sense impression, the labels, the identifiers, categorizers. And we can start to notice the subtle, pleasant or unpleasant aspect of these sense impressions. They all arise simultaneously, but they can be discerned. All of it momentary, fleeting. We can also discern when clinging gets involved. When you have a strong sense of, I want this or I don't want that, or even a subtle sense of push-pull. Or if there's a strong sense of me here, everything else out there. A strong sense of the dualistic divide, which is really based in a lot in the sense of identification, clinging to the form element, the body element. But just know the experience of form internally, the weight, sense of heaviness, sense of resistance, hardness, softness. All of those sensations are just an aspect of form, rupa, the play of the four elements in interaction. They're in a constant stream of arising and ceasing interactivity. And within all of this, there is awareness that knows, that sees. The fabric of knowing, the context of knowing. It knows the appearance of things, thoughts, sounds, perceptions, bodily experience. It knows their cessation as well, or it can discern disappearance. Excuse me. We can both discern the field of awareness as a moment of cognition, recognizing that, and we can also learn simply to rest the mind in that presence. Settle in presence, in pure awareness. It's not bounded in the same way as other phenomena which arise and cease and are seen to arise and cease, appear, disappear. Don't try to hold the mind here, restraining attention. Rather just recognize and rest. Appearances, other impressions may still arise and cease. Can be known just as they are. Allowing, allowing our mind, allowing attention to rest in full presence, naturally. Is a way of non-clinging. or a way of letting go, letting be. So let's bring this meditation to a close, and so we can have time for questions. Very gently, whatever you're experiencing, just come back into this shared space of the live stream. And if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. So someone's asked about, could I speak about how the concept of emptiness or sunyata, as taught in the Mahayana tradition, relates to the 5 skandhas or the 5 khandhas? So as I explained in the about the 3 characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, the unsatisfactory, the impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self-nature of all conditioned phenomena. This not self-nature is where the quality points to the quality of, or shows the quality of, insubstantiality, that there is no essential substance within those conditioned experiences that we can say is me, is mine, is what I am. So it's empty of me-ness, mine-ness, I-ness, due to this insubstantiality of conditioned existence. So that sign, it's something to be observed just as we observe impermanence. We observe, experience the dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness. When those 2 in particular are comprehended, the understanding of the emptiness or the insubstantiality of those phenomena is comprehended, is seen. It's the emptiness of substantial existence, meaning that these things, these experiences that we're observing, they have no lasting substance, something that is truly there. And so this emptiness, particularly the way that this Theravadan, or this early Buddhist, shall I say, this early Buddhist sign of anatta, is really looking at the I-ness, me-ness, mine-ness, or the insubstantiality of that, or the misplaced assumption of I-ness, me-ness, mine-ness with things that are changing. Once we see that those changing phenomena are insubstantial, nothing's left over once they're gone, then that is the emptiness aspect. Now, this concept of emptiness gets developed much further as the Mahayana tradition develops in history. A lot of different philosophical schools emerged and started talking about this quality of emptiness in more focused and, say, stronger ways. So sometimes it almost comes to sound like emptiness is a thing, something that we realized, some essential nature, which is emptiness, right? So we can talk about the essential nature of all things being empty. The emptiness is exactly what pervades the conditioned and the unconditioned, this insubstantiality. But if we take emptiness to be a something, some kind of substance we can get a hold of, then we've misunderstood that trajectory of this tenet. Nevertheless, with insight, this quality of emptiness is a very rich experience. This quality of insubstantiality is not a nothingness, is not a complete void. And this is where the Mahayana tradition and the Zen tradition really get into some lovely riffs about emptiness. Because the realization of emptiness is actually a profoundly connecting experience. Or realization. You can't even say it's an experience, because experience falls into the category of conditioned. It arises and ceases. But emptiness itself is the unchanging characteristic of everything, the conditioned and the unconditioned. The trick is, part of the problem is, as soon as we start to talk about things, about emptiness, because our language is inevitably shaped and rooted in dualistic notions, subject, object, this and that, and describing finite thingness and characteristics. As soon as we start to talk about emptiness, it gets conceived as a thing, as a something to be realized. So this is the shortfall of language. Yet without language, we can't point to reality or characteristics which can be helpful for eliciting insight. So this is very much why the Buddha encourages a contemplative path for individuals to realize for themselves, because you can't realize the truth through conceiving, through thinking about things. Even when we get the right understanding conceptually, that has to guide us in our practice in a way to letting go and seeing beyond the concepts and the paradigms, to experience a direct penetration of reality, to awaken. So everything that is taught are like pointers, like the proverbial finger pointing to the moon. So that we use the finger to point to the moon to guide attention. But if attention gets stuck on the finger, it says, I've got it, this is it. It doesn't see the moon, it doesn't find that full release through a full direct realization. So this is throughout history the problem that occurs. And there's a beautiful succinct teaching from Nagarjuna, who gave very strong and profound teachings on the middle way Dharma and the truth or the reality of emptiness, of sunyata, based on, it seems, one of the main discourses of the Buddha to Mahakaccana on dependent origination. So Nagarjuna is steeped in this. Nagarjuna's teachings are steeped in this teaching on emptiness. And he says, emptiness will liberate one from all conceptual views. But those who conceptualize emptiness will fail to realize liberation. So there's a lot of profundity within these words, and they're relevant all the way along the path. So I'll just say that much for now, and there's a lot of questions coming in. What kind of meditation is the best for cleaning 5 aggregates? Cleaning them of clinging maybe the meditation that I just guided you through, the Anattalakkhana Sutta, if you want to look that up, the discourse on the not-self nature of things. What I said, the Buddha, his second discourse, taught to the first 5 disciples, which was a cause for the awakening of all of them. This is a kind of an inquiry and a guided meditation. So just what I taught today in that sutta would be, I'd say, the most essential. There are plenty of different kinds of guided meditations which would help reduce clinging. It's the insight into anicca, dukkha, anatta that release the clinging, into the impermanent, unsatisfactory and empty or insubstantial nature of all conditioned things. Everything that arises ceases. So any contemplation of these, more specifically discerning the aggregates as we did in these meditations, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and sense consciousness as they're happening, seeing their transient nature, will clean them of clinging. Clean them of illusion as well. As soon as we see, fully comprehend the reality of just the way things are, this is what destroys delusion, because delusion is based on learned assumptions, conditioned assumptions. And what keeps that delusion going is the not seeing reality as it is and assuming I-ness, me-ness, mine-ness, and just continually engaging in the push-pull of life, the wanting, not wanting, which keeps creating a karmic momentum until we wake up, start to wake up to that. What does Sri Nisargadatta mean by I am? How does becoming aware without engaging in thought, is awareness knowable? Well, as I said in that meditation, awareness is knowable. We can discern awareness. But discerning and knowing is a moment of sense consciousness in that sense. But we can learn to rest in awareness, which is direct and sometimes gradually, sometimes non-gradually, one rests in the non-conceptual nature of awareness itself and realizes that. What does Nisargadatta and also Ramana mean by I am? So within the Advaita tradition, it is similar, the I amness, the way the Buddha said I am is an assumption, but it is a clinging, and it's a painful clinging. It's a dart, it's a calamity, it's a disease, a tumor, etc. It's a very strong habit, learned habit of the conceptual mind, the mind steeped in dualism and duality, not seeing beyond it. The attachment to these khandhas. Attachment meaning unquestioned assumption of me-ness, I, me, and mine. These are I, me, and mine. So when Nisargadatta and Ramana in the Advaita tradition point to, in meditation, to rest with the feeling of I am, this is the starting point really for mindfulness, to just rest in that feeling of being. So Nisargadatta clarifies in several meditations that what he means by this I am is to rest in this feeling of presence or being. So it's slightly different. The way the Buddha would use I am was always saying, well, it's a clinging. Whereas Nisargadatta, Ramana, they say, well, just rest in that feeling of being to establish your mindfulness and awareness. And then naturally, the sense of I am separates out. So they talk about the real behind the I am, that this I am is the first accessible place, this sense of just being. But the I am, we come to see it, it's a kind of a concept, a thought, the I am thought. They talk about it as the thought which gives rise to all other thoughts, this I am. But in meditation and in self-inquiry, that I am can drop away. And there's just this isness, pure being, pure awareness. And that's where the insight into the deeper layers of reality occur. Yes, so I do understand we must face the 5 aggregates. Emptiness is awareness, aware of itself. Is this advance? Don't quite understand that question, Kirk. Are you saying, is it advanced to say emptiness aware of itself? Is that advanced practice? I might get you to redefine that question for me, Kirk, and I'll come back to it. Jenny says, sharing someone's suffering with compassion, it is usually not fleeting. One may see the impermanence, but the suffering from seeing it lasts a long time. Well, it can appear to be so, but if you inquire into that experience of suffering, it is fleeting in its moment-by-moment nature. Now, I'm not saying that someone can snap out of their suffering like that, although it can happen, because that's what insight will do. It will wipe away the underpinnings of clinging. The identification with what's happening as a me and a mine and an I essentially is keeping that suffering in place. But as a lived experience for a human being, it often takes time to be with what's occurring in a way that is compassionate. So we're not trying to push it away, we're not trying to snap out of it, although that can happen in some few cases of deep insight. But bringing awareness to it that allows it to subside is the path of practice. Now, this is going to be experienced differently for different people, depending on what's going on. So it's not about trying to push any experience away. But it's not about holding on to it as a me and a my either, which takes the more entrenched, going to the other extreme of indulgence in pain, or really believing I am this pain. So this is the path of inquiry. We have to inquiry into this experience to loosen the assumptions within that. So my meditations, Jenny, you probably know, help us establish that approach, embodied awareness and mindfulness. And I've nearly finished a series of meditations which really specifically address the difficult emotions for people who are traversing things like depression or anxiety, grief and loss, desire in terms of addiction or strong anger. So we'll get these up and running soon. So, as the Buddha's words, in the Buddha's words by Bhikkhu Bodhi, he has no perplexity or doubt that what arises is only suffering arises, what ceases is only suffering ceasing. Thank you, that's right. And I'm just looking at the further question. His knowledge about this is independent of others. It is in this way, Kachana, there is right view. Can you please explain what his knowledge about this independent of others? Independent meaning through one's own experience. Exactly. So that that knowledge which is independent of others, it means he's penetrated to, through his own experience, he's seen directly that this is impermanent. This is not a basis for happiness, this clinging or ownership. And all conditioned things are insubstantial. When we see that clearly, not through labeling but seeing those characteristics as characteristics of all phenomena, but of particular phenomena as we're observing it, then that insight is called the knowledge that is independent of others. So he might have heard the Buddha teaching about these three characteristics, but so that's knowledge which is learned knowledge. But now his knowledge has become penetrated reality itself, direct experience, which is a difference between someone describing the taste of a banana and you understanding that description and creating some kind of concept of what it must be like, as opposed to just peeling the banana and eating it yourself. So now you have a non-conceptual understanding of banananess. You can start to think about it later and describe it to someone else in words, but the actual experience was direct, non-conceptual. And there was full comprehension in that without words, because you were tasting it yourself. That's what's called direct knowledge and independent through one's own experience. So could you briefly explain the difference between enlightenment and liberation? They're pretty much the same, enlightenment, liberation. From what I understand from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of the suttas, he uses enlightenment for a Pali word which would mean more literally awakening. So awakening, enlightenment, and liberation are talking about the same things. Liberation is sometimes the word vimokkha or freedom, vimutti. I think what I heard at Bhikkhu Bodhi chose enlightenment because the terms associated with awakening invoked a lot of images of light, like light arose, clarity arose, knowledge arose within the mind of the Buddha on awakening. So it's like a metaphor for the sun arising in the morning, and then everything is illuminated. Suddenly you see everything was there. A moment ago, everything was enshrouded in darkness. You couldn't discern necessarily what was there. As soon as the light arose, suddenly there's this full discernment, full awareness. Now, discernment is a word for wisdom. There's clear seeing, and within that clear seeing, comprehension. So this is metaphorical. So in my understanding, enlightenment is a recognition of the true self, and liberation is to uphold that recognition continually. Yeah, that's one way of putting it, which is cogent, is fine. Whether that comes more from perhaps a Zen perspective, possibly, because sometimes I think you hear within the Zen tradition that almost like the first awakening is an enlightenment, but then there's still work to do. I mean, they've got these words Kensho and Satori that it's like there can be deep insight and awakening, but it doesn't mean one is fully baked, or that delusion is fully cleared away, but maybe that the paths become clear. And so now it's a matter of practicing the path or aligning with what you've understood to the point where that liberation or that realization is unchanging. Something like that. Thich Nhat Hanh asks, empty of what? And answers, empty of a separate self. How would you consider this? Well, that's exactly what I said in my talk and in response to someone's earlier question. So I think we've answered that. Yes. Empty of what? Empty of a separate self. Empty of I-ness, me-ness, mine-ness. All of which indicate separateness and ownership. Thanks, Amanda. That's good. I'm glad you liked the meditation. And yes, indeed, come back to it again and again. What was the belief in early Buddhism about the karma dhatu realms? Were they considered to be literal or as metaphors for states of the mind? It seems to me that the realms are sometimes invoked. I think, within early Buddhism, the cosmology of the day in early Buddhism, it can be both. Whether ultimately they're states of mind. The karma dhatu, the realms, I think you mean the realms of rebirth, the different states that a karmic being can be born in. Ultimately, these are states of mind, there's no doubt. But it doesn't mean it doesn't necessarily take on more dreamlike manifestation, in that, when we go to sleep at night and dream, whilst you're dreaming, there's a sense, if there's no lucid clarity that recognizes dream as dream, there's usually a sense of reality and living through this experience. And it's only when we wake up in the morning that we recognize, oh, that was a dream. Yeah, so it's similar. So it doesn't mean that they say states of mind, which may be referred to as states of being, different realms of birth, different realms of possible states to be born into, but it essentially all drills down to being states of mind that are karmically, that have a strong karmic trajectory within them. And so it's only with full awakening, full understanding, that wisdom recognizes reality to the point that it sees that this karmic flow of things do not constitute a self or anything substantial. And so doesn't attach, doesn't cling anymore, so cannot be reborn according to such karmic states. So sometimes these, just in the chat, sometimes people put in questions that go across several several chat moments, but it gets intervened by other people's questions. So I seem to have answered part of that question, Wendy. We'll come to the next part when your question comes up. So Daniel says, don't forget to have fun while you're there. Yes, as much as possible, but with wisdom. How to tell the difference between pure consciousness and skandhas. That's for your contemplation. And if you listen to my meditation, you'll start to hear what I was pointing to within that. The khandhas, say the khandha of sense consciousness, can be observed, thoughts, perceptions to arise and cease. Anything that arises ceases. So this is what you have to look into, to observe the arising and ceasing of mental and physical phenomena through through that process of recognizing what arises and ceases, a recognition of what doesn't arise and cease can become clear, but only through your direct experience. Great. Some people are enjoying some of the stuff online, finding it really helpful. Very, very glad. Emptiness is awareness. Is that emptiness is awareness? Is that advancing or still here? Quiet, open, formless, big love. Excuse me. If I understand your question, empty awareness is always already present. It's not something that is only in the future. Always already present. We just may not recognize it. We may not have seen it yet. So that is the reason for meditative inquiry, for meditative experience. The emptiness of awareness, or the awareness of emptiness. You've got quiet, open, formless, big love. Always already here. The difficulties arise when that's not recognized or known directly. And there's quite a difference between conceptually knowing it or clinging to that notion conceptually and being that, let's say. When we accept the preciousness of being born human, this isn't just a state of mind, it's a literal realm. If the human realm's a literal realm, does that mean all other realms are literal too? Well, literal's just a word, isn't it? Literal too arises and ceases. Literal's just a concept. Everything. Mind is the forerunner of all conditioned states, the Buddha said. Mind is chief, mind made are they. It doesn't seem to make sense to say that the hell realm or hungry ghost realms are metaphors, but the human realm is literal. I'm not sure who's saying the human realm is literal. I think this is a way of thinking, Wendy. When you meditate more and observe the mind, including form, you start to see how everything is created. Our experience is created. Whether we call that internal, external, literal, or metaphorical. The Buddha just broke it down in terms of conditioned and unconditioned. When you're in the dream, you might be taking it literally, so-called literally. In the dream, you're not taking it metaphorically. But once you wake up from the dream, you see, it was a dream. And we even start to contemplate the dream as a metaphor or as, some kind of language of the unconscious. So anyway, just question that splitting, the conceptual splitting between literal and metaphor. We use metaphor in some ways to point to meaning. If we get too literal about everything, you end up with a very split world. I think extreme literalism is fundamentalism. But I won't go there. Okay. Last time in US Congress, is many hearing about UFO and non-human biological pilots. Did Buddha teach something about celestial non-human existence? Lots. Well, it relates a little bit to this question on other realms, other planes of existence. You know, through the Buddha's early teachings, there are, in the Buddhist cosmology, there are other planes of existence. Beings are born according to their karma. But he really didn't encourage a lot of, he didn't encourage belief in that. He encouraged, he didn't, you know, he encouraged direct insight. And so if that terrain is outside of your direct penetrative knowledge, you don't have to entertain it. You can believe it or not believe it, but it's not going to be intrinsic to your path of realization. But when you understand more and more how the mind works and how karma works and how mind does get caught in different states of being through the day, through the years, you can understand how different realms of existence would come to be, or how it would be possible to to wake up in a different existence, so to speak, because you just observe your mind from birth to death, and it's showing that all the time. Or observe your mind from dream experience to waking experience, and it is another kind of observance. But it doesn't mean you have to believe in some fixed other realms, because really it's all based in mind. And that doesn't mean your mind trapped in this brain. Mind is huge, for want of a better word. Words are so limiting. Okay, currently I'm facing a no-reason fear, which I can feel comes from deep within, and it feels like I will die. What should I do? Just sit calmly and let it go? How to deal with it? If you can sit calmly and let it go, that's the best. Just see fear as fear. It will arise because we all have to face into this stuff. When with ego existence, there is fear of death, fear of pain, fear of, as soon as there's a sense of separateness, fear comes into play. So just, if you can, yes, sit with calm mind, observing fear. That sounds like an impossibility, but it's not impossible. The Buddha talked before he was fully awakened, how he used to practice. If fear arose when he was sitting, he would continue to sit. He'd stay in that posture, meditating until that fear subsided. If fear arose while he was walking meditation, he'd continue to walk until that fear subsided. Or if it arose when he was standing meditation or lying down meditation, he would stay in that posture until that fear subsided. So this is a very inspiring teaching to engage when you're encountering fear. And to look at the sensation, where is the fear? Inquiry, where is the fear? How do I know this is fear? What's calling it fear? Is it in the body? Is it in the mind? If you sense it in the body, where in the body? Try to find the sensation or the predominant sensation that is being interpreted as fear. Just bring your mindfulness to that and encourage yourself to just breathe with that sensation in awareness. Breathing with the sensation just as it is. Until it subsides. The world as a pathway to the self becomes more evident to me through all religions and everyday life, though this seems to be only seen by me and not the people around me. Is this true for you? Not necessarily. It depends who you hang out with, I guess. You know, as a Buddhist, we hang out. I mean, we live in a neighborhood that's not Buddhist, but a lot of people have some good wisdom, Buddhist or not. But we also hang out with a lot of Buddhists and a lot of spiritual people who see and practice this path. And obviously, if you listen to Samaneri's teachings or the recordings on this YouTube channel, you know, there are thousands of people all around the world really appreciating and tuning into that. So, I mean, just to mention with that question, it can feel like that when you're starting out on the spiritual path, that, you know, no one around you is understanding this. But as you find more and more people who are akin, you'll recognize that there's a lot of people out there, you know, on a similar wavelength. Thank you, Ayya Jitindriya. Something clicked for me today when you mentioned the phrase conditioned phenomena. It's literally everything I experience. I really love this Buddha-Dhamma series. That's right, everything is conditioned, every experience. Anything that arises and ceases is conditioned. Doesn't mean we throw it all in the bin, because this is the very life, but now we can see it in perspective and not have to push it away, but nor do we have to cling to it as a permanent self or a permanent reality. So that's great, Niall. Glad that clicked for you. I find it difficult to live in the world after a recognition that life is a dream. There is no ambition for doing worldly things. How can we deal with that? Is this just another illusion? Yeah, it can be. I mean, the fact that it depends what you mean by no ambition for doing worldly things. You know, we are in this as sentient beings. We are in this predicament, but we can use our life for the greater welfare, for the benefit of beings. So there's lots of things that you can do with this wonderful opportunity you have that will bring benefit to beings, that will help. There's so much suffering in the world that your life can become a blessing with right view, with right understanding. If you can reduce the suffering in your own heart and mind and engage in activity that supports others to do the same, or that directly helps others to do similarly, or just living a life of understanding in this regard, can be a great relief for those who meet you. They recognize that there's something different intuitively. There's possibility for freedom, for release. So it doesn't mean that you need to re-engage ambition, but let compassionate wisdom be your direction, or that which sets direction, that which guides you, that which leads you. Now, the other side of this, which can be more illusory, is we fall into a kind of a sense of pointlessness or meaninglessness, or something that kind of can undermine our energy. That's like going to another extreme, you know. So contemplate in terms of, what can I do with this life? Look around you. How can I use this wonderful opportunity, this capacity of a sentient being to awaken and to fully engage that innate wisdom and compassion for the benefit of beings. This can be a wonderful, joyous, and creative journey. It all depends on the way you look at it. Someone's enjoying the magpies? Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Fear, false evidence appearing real. Yep. Thank you so much. Gratitude. Can previous depression conditions limit the way to understanding or absorbing Buddha teachings? Well, we can all be limited in our understanding of things. Inevitably, we even take on these teachings initially with our own conditioned way of being. That's like the starting point. So we have to study and practice in order to keep clearing up the assumptions and the conditioned perceptions. And gradually, the old conditioned views start to fall away and the clearer seeing comes through your own experience. So someone's asked, have the nature of my dreams changed through your practice? Oh, excuse me, I'm shifting position. I haven't worked specifically with dream life. I know within the Tibetan tradition there's a stream of practice that works with dreams and bringing lucid awareness into dreams. Sometimes that's happened for me. But I find I don't dream an awful lot these days, but sometimes I do, and there's different factors that condition that. So I wouldn't say the nature of my dreams have changed, but I mean, over many years, I've been practicing for many years. I would just say the frequency and perhaps the liveliness of dreams has become less. But as I said, it depends. Sometimes it depends on what you ingest and what you've been engaging in through the day as to what images appear at night. Nisargadatta said that earnestness was most important quality for liberation. I feel your deep compassion, skill, and earnestness to teach us. Thank you. Well, thank you. And I think earnestness with Nisargadatta was similar to the Buddhist Pali word appamada, which means sometimes gets translated as diligence, but is also related to mindfulness, actually. A mind that is never is always with mindfulness. Mindfulness always accompany that mind. So that's another way of thinking of earnestness. But also it is, in the English word, it does come with a sincerity, which is very important. Yeah. Thank you. There is perceptual reality and there is existential reality. Perceptual reality and existential reality. Yes, I think so. But in the end, even the perceived existential reality is ultimately a perception. So we've come to the end of our questions, which we've run a little over time today, but that's all good. I hope you've all not only enjoyed the session, but have gotten something out of it. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And, do review the first and second sessions if you haven't done so yet. And our fourth session will be in another 6 weeks' time. But in between, 2 more sessions, one from Samneri Jayasara in 2 weeks' time and myself the following 2 weeks. So great to connect with you all again today. May you all be well, and may you all gain deep insight into your very own reality. No one else can see it but you. It's right here, right now. So may you get in touch with that earnestness and sincerity that is really keen on knowing just the way things are. Thanks, everybody. Take care. See you again soon.